Patriots day off today. We still heard from Bill Belichick this morning and the assistant coaches. Seems like today's a day where they're really going to have some serious discussions about roster cutdowns. So players are home being a little nervous today, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely, Sierra. This is one of those days where you got all the names up on the whiteboard on the little magnets, right? And everybody's kind of has their seat at the table, and you get to sort of have a general conversation about it. I think the interesting thing what Bill Belichick said this morning was the coaches felt like they needed this day off to kind of catch up on those sort of things and maybe even start to turn the page a little bit to Miami and game planning for that, week one as well. So it seemed like I was kind of surprised that the players were off in the middle of the week like this, but I think it actually is like one of those days off they give students with the teachers need to go into school and, do those meetings and stuff like that to prep and get ahead and things like that. And I think that that's what we're seeing. And with the influx of roster moves that are going to happen on Saturday is going to be one of the wildest days in the NFL in quite some time, just because of the lack of preseason, the lack of knowledge about some of these guys that people are having right now. It's going to be wild west out there trying to get everybody that was waived, on a roster and on a practice squad and all that kind of stuff.
Well, we got a question here on Twitter. What is the greatest area of need still on this team right now?
Well, I think the question really is a tough one to answer because it really depends on whether or not you're going to just let the rookies kind of grow up fast here. Tight end and off-ball linebacker are still my biggest holes on this team right now. But if you're going to go out and add a veteran tight end, that means that Devin Ostiasi or Dalton Keene is not playing as much as you would maybe like them to play in a developmental year. Same at linebacker. That would mean that Cash and Josh Uche and then Freddie Jennings and those guys might not see as many reps if you go out and sign or trade for a veteran linebacker. So those are the two spots that I definitely see as the biggest kind of areas and needs or weaknesses after watching camp. But the question is are we just going to let the rookies develop, the young guys develop in those spots, or are we going to go out and, add and kind of improve with a veteran at one of those positions?
Well, we know that at the wide receiver position, there's been plenty of questions leading into camp, but one guy who stood out is Gunnar Olszewski. We have a question here on YouTube. Do you think he's eventually going to be the next Julian Edelman?
Well, I think the thing that's crazy about Gunnar is that he has shown in camp and even a little bit last year in the preseason and regular season that he can run routes from the outside just as easily as he can run routes from the inside. So to me, he's not necessarily in the Wes Welker archetype. He's actually more so in the Julian Edelman archetype where they can move him around the formation. He can run routes from any alignment, and he's a pretty darn dynamic route runner at this point. And it's funny too, because the one flaw that he has is his hands and catching and, too many drop passes, which is the one flaw that you could probably point out with Julian Edelman too. So it's kind of a redux right now. I don't want to put that on Gunnar and say he's going to turn into Edelman and have those types of expectations, but just in terms of their skill sets, it is kind of crazy how closely aligned they are with what they're good at and what they're not good at.
Well, there's a bunch of Alvin Kamara rumors swirling around, and we talked about it with Leonard Fournette. Should the Patriots be interested? Do you think that there's any type of way that would be a fit?
Well, I think that anybody would love to have Alvin Kamara on their football team. And to me, I think what Ian Rappaport tweeted out last night, that cooler heads prevailed on that front. I mean, that would be mind-blowing to see the Saints walk away from Kamara just over a contract dispute. And what I had heard is that they were just kind of a difference of a couple of $1 million. So to lose a player like that over $5 million, $2 million, something like in that range, I think would just be absolutely crazy. But what ended up happening was Kamara saw Joe Mixon's deal and immediately was like, well, what the hell? I'm making half of that right now. Why am I not getting paid? So that's what triggered Kamara to kind of get in his feelings a little bit and have his feelings hurt a little, was because of the Mixon deal. And now he wants to get paid. In terms of the Patriots, I mean, it's Kamara, it's, Saquon, it's CMC. I mean, go right down the line of, pass catching dual threat running backs that would fit the Patriots well. It's kind of those three guys at the top of the list.
Well, back to the Patriots. They also have a lot of depth at running back right now, but we have a question on Twitter. If the Patriots put their 5 most skilled players on the field, who are they?
That's a really good question. I think in terms of, we're talking fourth quarter, 2 minutes left, tie game, Cam Newton needs to drive 80 yards, to win the game, something like that. I think that we're probably going Edelman, N'Keal Harry, It all depends on what they do with that third wide receiver spot. Yeah, I think those two guys are your two top receivers. Then you could maybe argue for Sanu. You could even argue for Damari Bird or Gunnar Olszewski. So that third spot I think is really up in the air. At tight end, I'm going Devin Ostiasi. Running back, obviously James White would be the guy in that situation. So that's sort of your 11 personnel, if you will, 3 wide receiver set. If the game is on the line and you need a drive, I think those are the 5 guys roughly that you would put on the field.
Let's go back to those tight ends. Devin Ostiasi definitely impressed throughout training camp. Couple of days where he was dealing with that injury. But do you think they're going to utilize that 2 tight end set with either Dalton Keene or possibly another tight end on the roster?
Well, I think they'll utilize it a little bit. I don't think it's going to look quite the same as what it did, when it was Gronk and Marty B or Gronk and Hernandez. I think it's going to have its own sort of flavor to it. But I do think that Ostiasi is going to be a guy that's predominantly playing either on the line or in the slot. And you have somebody like Dalton Keene who can maybe play an H-back or a fullback type of role. So we might see the 2 of them on the field at the same time. But in terms of, how it works out schematically and where everybody's aligned and all that stuff, it might just be as simple as what you would think of basic 21 personnel, right? Keene in the backfield, Ostiasi in line at the end of the line there. And it won't look, I don't think it's going to look too crazy, especially with 2 rookies. I just don't expect them to be able to handle it mentally at the beginning, certainly, to be able to kind of move those guys around like chess pieces quite yet.
Let's talk about Damian Harris quickly, because another situation almost similar to last year now with Lamar Miller off PUP, Sony Michel off PUP. You got James White, Rex Burkhead, and now Damian Harris. Has he done enough, you think, to see the field more this season?
If he doesn't see the field this season, I think that we can start to get a little bit angry about it, quite frankly, because this is the time right now where I think we really do need to see Damian Harris. And the one thing I've been thinking about with Harris in particular, because I stay up at night and think about this stuff because I'm crazy, right, is the one thing I've been thinking about is if you go back to his college days at Alabama, he worked with Tua, he worked with Jalen Hurts, and a lot of zone read RPO type of concepts. And you're trying to think of the best back for that style of offense on the Patriots roster right now. I really do think it's Damian Harris. Now, if they're going to go to their more traditional 2-back, fullback in the backfield power running game, then maybe Michel or Miller fit that a little bit better. But in terms of what they're going to do with Cam, where he's going to be in the gun a lot of the time, you're not going to be under center a whole lot, and you're going to be running a lot of different option concepts, I think that's really where Damian Harris can shine because he has that burst through the line. He has that experience in those types of schemes.
There's a couple questions about Sony Michel and Lamar Miller as well, just sticking with that position. Someone wants to know if you think Sony Michel will show serious improvement this season and if Lamar Miller has his chance to start.
Unfortunately, we didn't get to see Sony in a padded practice. I think maybe one padded practice we got with Michel healthy, so we didn't get to see how he quite looks. But to the eye test, he looks a little bit thinner. He looks a little bit leaner this year. And I think he finally realized, and the Patriots might have finally realized, that playing him up at closer to 225 really wasn't the best for his skill set because he was really heavy, right? And his feet were heavy, and we could tell that he wasn't running with that same burst that we saw in college. So I think he did trim some weight down just a little bit. Maybe he realizes now too that with Miller and Harris and all these guys in there, they're going to be a little bit more like a committee than they have in the past. So he doesn't necessarily need to run it 250 times. So he doesn't need that bulk, right, that he had in his rookie season, for example. So I think that we do see a little bit of a more kind of spry Sony Michel, and he definitely looked like he had some fresh legs when he got off the PUP list last week.
And with Lamar Miller, people want to know if he has the opportunity to start. Another guy that we never saw at training camp, came off PUP right when training camp ended in the media's eyes, came off of practice. So don't really know what he has in the tank at this point. But from what you do know, the little that you do know, do you think that he's going to have a significant contribution this season?
I don't know. I think that, it all kind of comes down to how high they are on Harris and how much they're going to force Michel down people's throats, right? I think ideally you would like to see everybody sort of get a chance in the first month or so of the season and then kind of ride the hot hand the rest of the way. That would be what I would do, but I think Bill Belichick obviously has different mind than mine, so we'll see what he ends up doing. But I think with Lamar, I think the thing that stands out the most to me when I watched his tape from 2018, because last year he was hurt, was the main thing was that Houston offense is an iteration of the Patriots offense. So he knows what he's running, right? It's the style, it's the same concepts, it's the same general running game than what you're going to see in New England. So I don't think mentally he really needs to learn or catch up all that much. So that's an advantage that he has. And certainly the other advantage that he has is that speed. That 4.3 speed is something on this roster the Patriots don't currently have in another back. Michelle, Harris, those guys are more, low 4.5s, right? So it's not quite the same sort of burst and acceleration and big play ability. So I think that that's really, to me, the next step for Lamar Miller is to prove that he can still run like that. If he can still be that back that he was in 2018, then he's going to be in the mix.
Couple wide receiver questions here. Do you think Jeff Thomas has the opportunity to still make the roster? We know he also has some serious speed, but absent for a lot of training camp.
Gone back and forth on this one a ton with my roster projection. Is he on? Is he off? The Patriots seem to really like him internally, so I think that there is a chance that they just say, we're going to base it off of the college tape and what we have seen and just keep him on the team. Right now, I have him off the roster. Listen, with no training camp, with no preseason, his speed might go claimed, right? Somebody that runs a 4.28, 4.30 flat, they might just claim him just off of reputation of that speed alone. But there's so little information because remember, he didn't really play a ton in college either because of the suspensions and the various other things that happened to him there at the U. So he really doesn't have a ton of tape in general. I go back and watch his tape when they first signed him and I'm like scrapping together games because there's really not that much there. So there's not a ton of college tape. There's no tape from the preseason this year. So to claim him would be strictly off of the fact that everybody has this allure of how fast he is, like he's Tyreek Hill type fast. We don't know if he's Tyreek Hill type fast. We don't know if he's Brendan Cooks fast. Is he Cooks fast or is he Dorsett fast? Those are the two guys I always kind of use. So I think really Jeff Thomas is probably going to get waived by the team. I think he could sneak back onto the practice squad after that, and then we'll see where things go.
Some insider info here from our viewer in the comments saying Jeff Thomas changed his Instagram bio from Patriots wide receiver to NFL wide receiver. Very interesting. Well, another wide receiver that a lot of people are asking about, which is kind of surprising if you asked us before the start of training camp, is Mohamed Sanu. You had a thought a couple weeks ago that Mohamed Sanu has the potential to maybe be a surprise cut. ESPN's Mike Reese now saying that Sanu's on his watch list for the roster cutdown day. What's going on here with Sanu? Is he a lock?
Well, I think the biggest issue that we see with Sanu is that he can no longer run by anybody. He's really not, he can't run like he used to. So the explosive plays, the catches of over 15, 20 yards, you're not going to get them out of Sanu. But what you will get out of Sanu is consistency, a veteran presence, savviness, leadership, all those types of things. And when I look at this receiving core, now listen, if they can trade Sanu and recoup some of that trade back. The second round pick looks really bad right now in hindsight, right? So if you can go and get a fourth rounder for him and just kind of make up for that trade, then I think that that's a really good investment. But if you're going to just cut him outright, I think you're trusting a lot in guys like Damari Byrd and guys like Gunner and guys like maybe a Devin Ross or a Jeff Thomas or a Jacoby Myers, whoever takes on that last spot, to be able to play 60, 70 snaps a game and be a consistent playmaker on the outside or inside. And I think that that's a lot to ask for out of such a young receiver. I mean, we haven't seen any of those guys play a full season, play every game, play every snap, none of those things, right? So to expect that out of somebody like that, I think is going to be a challenge.
Going back up here for a question I looked at from Ryan saying, if Cam Newton has a good year for the Patriots, do you think that they could keep him long-term potentially?
Well, if the 2-minute and 30-second gush fest that Belichick had on the radio the other day is any indication, then maybe. I think the biggest thing that you run into with Cam is not necessarily, is he going to be good? Is he worth the price tag? But it's just about roster construction. And in this rebuild, do you want to have a $25 million tag on your quarterback? Do you want to have a $30 million price tag on your quarterback? Or do you want to go with a younger option or a cheaper option as you kind of build the rest of the roster up? Because quite frankly, the skill players are what they are at this point. This certainly isn't Kansas City or, one of those teams that is loaded at those positions. So they still have a lot of work to do, I think, in developing talent that they already have on the team and then going out and adding talent to those skill player positions that a quarterback like Jared Stidham or Brian Hoyer, I think, would have a lot of trouble scoring points with this current offense. So to me, I love the idea of having Cam here long term, but the question is his body up for it? And is that really how they want to distribute the money on their team? They weren't willing to pay Tom Brady that kind of money, so I'm a little hesitant to say that they would pay Cam.
Well, Leon wants to know what's up with Bo Allen and if their Patriots still need a defensive tackle to add to that spot.
I don't think they need a defensive tackle. I'm more concerned about the second level than the first level right now because Byron Cowart, Dietrich Wise, Lawrence Guy, Adam Butler, they all looked pretty good in camp and like they were ready to go. It's really the linebackers behind them. This is a two-gapping system for the most part. So those guys up front, they're supposed to eat blocks. They're not necessarily supposed to defeat them or supposed to make splash plays behind the line of scrimmage. That's the job of the second level guys when they're kept clean because those guys up front are taking on double teams and occupying blockers on the offensive line. Who's going to be that second level that's going to go, side to side to be able to bring down the run play? That's more of my concern. But I think the interesting thing about Bo Allen is I could see him making the team on Saturday, making the 53, and then getting put on injured reserve after the cut down day in order to get him back later on in the season. If he's not going to be healthy the first month of the season or so, and he hasn't been out there yet, maybe he is one of those prime candidates. We see it all the time. They did it with N'Keal Harry last year, where you make the initial team so that you can come back during the season on the IR. I wouldn't be surprised if Bo Allen's one of those guys, and then during that time period, those 8 weeks, you can then sign other players in his roster spot.
We have a question over on Twitter saying, if Juwan Williams makes the move over to safety, who then becomes the odd man out at safety and who can maybe slip in at a roster spot at cornerback?
Yeah, I saw this question, and I don't really see it that way because really to me, a lot of these guys, I wouldn't say every single one, but a lot of these guys have position versatility and flexibility, right? And you go kind of back and forth between either the slot or the outside or safety and corner. So I think really it's not necessarily cornerback safety and you separate it like that. I more look at it like just defensive backs in general, because that is really the hallmark of this defense is flexibility and being able to move into different spots and play different spots as a defensive back. So I don't think that it necessarily would be an odd man out situation or another guy would end up making the team. In my mind, I think they keep about 10 defensive backs in general, and whether they're a cornerback or a safety, it's kind of just about who's the best player for that spot.
Back on YouTube, we got someone yelling at us. Do you believe that Belichick has many years ahead? Very concerned about Belichick's future here.
All right. Well, I think that, listen, I think the thing that you see first and foremost with Bill is that he still absolutely loves to do it. He still loves to coach, right? And you see it from every walk of the coaching and every walk of the NFL calendar, from the draft to free agency to the combine to the season to the regular season to the postseason to training camp. He still breathes it, eats it every single day. So I don't think that the drive or the hunger has gone away. And I think also to a degree, succeeding without Tom Brady might be the top thing on his list to do right now. Other than win another Super Bowl, of course, it's a little bit sweeter, I think, to him right now to be successful without Brady. So I think he's going to keep doing it until he can prove it wasn't just Brady. I can go out there and win 11, 12 games a year just by myself.
A lot of questions about the skills at wide receiver and why the Patriots can't get better wide receivers on the team. And it relates back to another question we got about what the coaching staff thinks of the skill players on this team. They said it seems like they weren't interested in drafting a wide receiver in this deep class. So do you think they're not concerned with the players they have at that position?
Well, I think what we heard from Bill Belichick right after the draft, and we keep repeating it, was actually true. Was that they felt like they invested a first and a second round pick in the last two drafts in that position in N'Keal and in Mohamed Sanu. I don't think they wanted to go out there and invest big draft capital. One thing that's sort of been on my radar, and this is no knock on Mick Lombardi or Joe Judge, but the way that they've sort of coached that position, I think maybe deserves a little bit more criticism. I think one of the reasons why is because who are we to say what to do with your coaching staff if you're Bill Belichick? Obviously, he's smarter than all of us. But I really do kind of feel like that position in particular, I go out there and I see them in training camp and I see certain technique things or certain fundamental things in route running that N'Keal Harry is just doing wrong. Like at the top of the route, where I continuously tell people he's stepping underneath himself. He's losing ground out of his break. That's something that I've spoken to other receiver coaches and people that know a lot more about the position than me. That's something that you need to be hands-on about. You can't go back in the film room, okay, N'Keal, we see you doing, we need, right? You go and you need to actually say this, actually work through the steps with him, right? And go through the body motions and retrain his muscles. That's really what we're talking about here. I think, unfortunately, when we get to this point of the season and this point in training camp, there's not a ton of time to do that, right? This is more about getting ready to play in games, getting ready for Miami in week 1, and not necessarily about your footwork and your fundamentals and all that kind of stuff, even though they drill that a ton. I personally feel like last year Joe Judge was splitting duties between special teams coordinator and wide receivers, and the wide receiver position is a mess. This year, Mick Lombardi is coaching wide receivers, who, again, no slide on him, but he's also, not a very experienced, let's just say, at coaching wideouts. This is his first time ever coaching that position at any level of football, as far as I know. So it's just an interesting thing when there's guys out there like a Chad O'Shea or a couple other guys that have 20, 30 years of experience coaching that position, and you have a guy that's never done it before coaching it, or you have a guy doing it and also coaching special teams. It's just sort of a position that they seem to be neglecting a little bit on the coaching staff.
We'll get to a couple more questions here. Someone's calling you out for needing to make your bed, but I'm going to give Evan some slack here. He just moved into this apartment yesterday, guys. Give him a break. Give him a break about his surroundings, okay? Well, there's a question here about the offensive line coaches. Obviously, a big transition from Dante Scarnecchia, the legend. Is there any noticeable concerns for the new dual coaches making that transition from Scar?
Honestly, the offensive line has looked really good in camp, and they've actually developed those second-year guys, specifically like a Yelda Froholt or Jermaine Illuminor, have really come a long way in this training camp. And I'm not saying they don't miss Scar or that these guys are better than Scar, but the one thing that you will see is that with two guys, kind of gives them an opportunity to have one watching and one coaching, and you see that in one-on-one drills or team drills where they're both sort of watching everything unfold. Then once something happens, they can one can break off with that guy and say, this is what we want you to do. This is what you did wrong, while the other is still watching the other group. So I think that's an exciting part about it. You see two guys working together in tandem, having that ability to kind of separate things. And I think that it's really paid a lot of dividends having two people at that position, especially a position that has a lot of young players on it, a lot of talent on it, and they just really need to develop it.
And we've heard a lot of good things about J.C. Jackson recently. And we have a question here on whether or not you think he could be considered a top 10 cornerback in the league.
Well, listen, I think the big thing about J.C. Jackson is that if you're going to play opposite of Stephon Gilmore, you're just not going to get that credit, right? You're just not, because you're not taking the number one guy every week. You're not the one that has, no help over the top or little help over the top. I think what we're saying with Jackson, though, is that he's sort of getting slighted a little bit because who's on the other side, which is, kind of fair. I think is fair criticism to say, he's covering number 2s and number 3s all the time when Gilmore's taking the top guy. So maybe his job isn't as difficult as some other number 1 corners that we would put ahead on the list. So I think I can understand that. I know Patriots fans don't want to hear that, but I can definitely understand that, there's a difference between being the number 1 guy and being the number 2 guy, especially at that position. So it's a big difference, but in terms of, he looks great. I mean, he probably was the best player on the field in camp. Gilmore wasn't out there all that much. He had, those excused absences and stuff like that, but I would say that he might be the best player on the Patriots roster based off of training camp. And obviously we know Gilmore is right up there as well.
And one last question here. Everyone always brings up Cam Newton not diving on that.
I'm glad you brought this one up, because this is just, it's ridiculous. Like, this was 5 years ago, everybody. It was 5 years ago.
They cling on to the one moment where he didn't show full, buy-in, but who knows what was going through Cam Newton's head at the time. Do you think Bill Belichick changed his mindset, or do you think Cam Newton's not really that kind of player who doesn't give 100% effort all the time?
I think it's really easy to go back and look in that one play and say, here, this is a kind of proof that he doesn't go all out. He's not that competitor. I think that's crazy. I mean, he's one of those guys that year in and year out, when he's healthy at least, has performed at an extremely high level. You don't do that for 17 weeks in a row without, or 16 games in a row, I should say, without competitive. That sort of nature about you. I think that whole criticism to kind of set up in one play, the way that I always look at that is, if we were going to sum up Tom Brady's career in one negative play, we go to the strip sack against Philadelphia, right? Is that how we sum up Tom Brady's career? Is just that one player, or are we going to talk about everything else that happened? I think that it's crazy to think that is sort of always going to live with Cam. If he doesn't win a Super Bowl, that's probably be part of his legacy forever for a lot of people. Really disappointing, because I think that happens with a lot of guys like Cam, that were really super talented, won MVPs, but not necessarily a Super Bowl. They always get knocked for the little things that happen in that one game when they came really, really close to it. So this is not a guy that's, anybody's questioning his competitiveness. He's in there at 6 a.m. every single day. He's out of there at 7 p.m. 13 hours later. He's pulling 12, 13-hour days right now at the New England facility, practicing every single day, working his butt off to get ready for the season, saying all the right things.
Away from his kids, yeah.
Yeah, I just think that's some sports radio criticism is what that is.
Yeah, I tend to agree. He seems pretty bought in from what we've seen so far. One last question. I lied that last time. Leonard Fournette, reports coming out today that the Patriots are not interested in him. What's kind of that wrinkle making that not a possibility to bring him here to New England?
Well, I think it's like, it really depends what kinds they're going to be. If you saw Tom Brady here and you were going to just be that under center smash mouth run game, then maybe you would consider Leonard Fournette, who truly is one of the better power runners in this league. Last year Jacksonville led the league in power plays, meaning they pulled a guard or they pulled a tackle 42% of the time, which led the entire NFL. So they were a smash mouth downhill. Let's get some double teams. Let's pull a guard in there and let's knock some, blocks off. That was their running game. And Fournette obviously is a beast and is the perfect guy to be able to run that scheme. But with Cam, if you're going to be more shotgun, if you're going to be more zone read, RPO type of style in your running game, then I'm not sure that his skill set is necessarily what we're going to be talking about. But if they're going to go back to the Brady thing and they're still going to put Cam under center a decent amount and they're still going to run that sort of running game, then Fournette's a perfect fit for what they used to do. I'm just not sure if that's still what they're doing now.
Well, that will do it for another Patriots Live Q&A. If we didn't get to your questions, we'll be back again sometime. So don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Patriots Press Pass so you never miss a time we go live or the daily Patriots content we churn out leading up to the regular season. For Evan Lazar, I'm Sierra Goodwill. Thanks for tuning in.